Hey, thank you for listening to this episode of History's Greatest Battles. If you've enjoyed any episodes, this one included, feel free to both subscribe and share it with a friend. It's a great way to support the effort we put forth here. There are some very pivotal battles, even some entire reigns, that, while relatively recent in history, we have surprisingly little information on, especially the numbers. One of those today has an account written for the great-great-grandson of Charlemagne. His great-great-grandson was named Charles the Fat, and it was about the battle of today that we'll be discussing. Perhaps the most pivotal battle that put Charlemagne on his path, and it set up the Holy Roman Empire that served the Papacy. Quote, "When you see the fields bristle as with ears of iron corn," he said, "when you see the Po break over the walls of your city in great waves which gleam black with all the glint of iron, then indeed you can be sure that Charlemagne is at hand." Then came in sight that man of iron, Charlemagne, topped with his iron helm, his fists in iron gloves, his iron chest and his Platonic shoulders clad in an iron cuirass, an iron spear raised high against the sky he gripped in his left hand, while in his right hand he held his still unconquered sword. His shield was all of iron, his horse gleamed iron-colored, and its very metal was as if of iron. All those who rode before him, those who kept his company on either flank, those who followed after, wore the same armor, and their gear was as close a copy of his own as it is possible to imagine. Iron filled the fields and the open spaces. The rays of the sun were thrown back by this battle line of iron. Then he said to Desiderius, "That is Charlemagne, who you have sought so long." As he spoke, he fell half conscious to the ground. Let's now experience the Battle of Pavia.
Welcome to History's Greatest Battles, Season 1, Episode 42, The Battle of Pavia, 774 AD. Charlemagne's Frankish forces, unknown. Lombard forces, also unknown. The fall of the Lombard monarchy shattered Rome's fiercest adversary, obliterating the looming specter that had stalked papal authority for years. With its collapse, the foundation for an empire destined to claim the mantle of Rome itself was set in motion.
In 756 AD, an alliance was forged between the Papacy and the burgeoning might of the Frankish kingdom, a union bound in both blood and in faith. Pepin III, who was small in stature but colossal in ambition, variously known as Pepin the Short and Pepin the Great, answered the desperate plea of Pope Stephen II. The Lombards had ravaged the lands of northern Italy, threatening to strangle Rome itself, but Pepin would not allow it. The Pact of Iron and Spirit found its roots in Stephen's pivotal support for Pepin's overthrow of the feeble Merovingian king Childeric III in 751. By 754, with the Pope's blessing, Pepin solidified his claim, anointed not just as ruler, but as a protector of Rome itself. This moment ignited a sacred intertwining of sword and cross in Frankish lands. Pepin, now Patricius Romanus, and his descendants would stand as guardians of the Catholic Church, shielding it from enemies both worldly and unholy. In 755, Pepin marched with the force of a conqueror into Italy, his sights set on Pavia, determined to crush the ambitions of Aistulf, the unyielding Lombard king. Yet, scarcely had Pepin returned to his homeland when Aistulf, relentless in his defiance, once more turned his eyes toward Rome, hungry for conquest. In 756, Pepin returned, his resolve hardened. Aistulf was crushed beneath the weight of Frankish steel once more, and in victory, Pepin pledged vast swaths of Italy to the Pope, securing the Church's earthly dominion. Aistulf's death brought forth Desiderius, a new Lombard king who, at least in word, vowed to respect papal lands and power, but promises in the world of kings are as fragile as their crowns. When Pepin passed in 768, his realm was cleaved in two, entrusted to his sons, Carloman II and the indomitable Charles. By all accounts, the brothers maintained a tenuous peace, a rare harmony in a world ruled by ambition. Despite continued Lombard provocations against the papacy, an easy truce held between the Franks and their Italian counterparts, a calm before the inevitable storm. In 770, under the watchful eye of his mother, Charles cast aside his wife to take Desiderata, daughter of the Lombard king, into his arms, an alliance meant to solidify peace, but destined for ruin. Within a year, Desiderata was sent back to her father in disgrace, her dismissal still clouded in mystery, perhaps infertility, perhaps something darker. The insult seared deep into Desiderius's pride, stoking the embers of vengeance. In 771, death claimed Carloman, and Charles, now sole ruler, stood alone at the helm of the Frankish kingdom, unchallenged and unbowed. Carloman's widow fled to Lombardy, throwing herself on Desiderius's mercy, who wasted no time in championing her son as the rightful heir to the Frankish throne. In the meantime, tensions simmered between Charles and Pope Stephen III, the pontiff's disapproval of Charles's marriage to Desiderata adding fuel to the already strained relations. Charles, unmoved by the pope's censure, saw Stephen edge closer to Desiderius, granting Lombard loyalists power within Rome and silencing those who dared to oppose them. When Stephen passed in 772, Hadrian I took the papal throne and wasted no time in purging the city of its Lombard agents, restoring Rome's independence. Desiderius did not take this insult lightly. Violence followed swiftly. As Desiderius pretended diplomacy with the Pope, his armies surged deeper into papal lands, taking town after town. Atriculum soon fell, a scant day's march from the very gates of Rome itself. In desperation, Hadrian mustered what forces remained to him and sent a plea to Charles, the only man who could stem the tide of Lombard aggression. Hadrian's envoy was forced to brave the sea bound for Marseille, for Desiderius had sealed off every land route into Frankish territory. After a perilous journey, the emissary reached Charles, who was holding court at Thionville, north of Metz, and with urgency delivered Hadrian's fateful message. Quote, "They would attack us by land and water, conquer the city of Rome, and lead ourselves into captivity. Therefore we implore you by the living God and the Prince of Apostles to hasten to our aid immediately, lest we be destroyed." End quote. The message came with a list of Desiderius's alleged allies, figures whom ambitions and loyalties endangered Charles's authority at every turn. Charles dispatched envoys to Rome and Lombardy, proposing peace while in the shadows. He prepared his legions for war. Once Charles had undeniable proof of Desiderius's escalating aggression and the king's arrogant rejection of a generous ransom for the stolen papal cities, his decision was swift. By the early summer of 773, the Frankish war machine was fully mobilized, its soldiers marching with purpose toward Italy. The true scale of Charles's army, shrouded in mystery, remains elusive. This veil of uncertainty hangs not just over this campaign, but over nearly every military endeavor he undertook, as if his forces themselves were a legend. Some sources whisper that only a few thousand knights stood beneath Charles's banner, while others speak in awe of an army numbering a staggering 100,000 men, a fearsome mix of cavalry and infantry that could sweep across kingdoms like a tide of steel. Regardless of the force's size, Charles split his army into two columns. His uncle Bernard led one through the perilous St. Bernard Pass, while Charles himself commanded the other, driving them through the heights of the Dora Susa by Mount Cenis. The Frankish troops crested the Alps with ease, descending into the fertile valleys below, only to be confronted by a defiant Lombard fortification bristling with Desiderius's warriors. Charles's initial assault faltered against the Lombard defenses. Forced to stall his advance, he entered into hollow negotiations, all while the grumbles of restless soldiers echoed through his camp, their swords itching for bloodshed. With time slipping away and no breakthrough in sight, Charles sanctioned a daring reconnaissance, sending a small detachment to scour the unforgiving terrain for an alternate path. Fortune, or perhaps betrayal, smiled on the Franks. Tradition holds that a Lombard minstrel, lured by the glittering promise of gold, defected to Charles's side, revealing the secret of an unguarded route through the mountains. However it came to pass, the result was undeniable. A band of Frankish cavalry appeared like a vengeful storm on the Lombard flank. The defenders, gripped by fear, abandoned their posts and fled, seeking refuge within the fortified walls of Pavia. Rumors swirled that Bernard's forces were closing in from the east, their imminent arrival enough to tip the balance and send the Lombards scattering in disarray. With the Lombard camp abandoned, Charles's men, still seething from their earlier frustration, indulged themselves in the spoils. But the victory feast was short-lived. By September 773, they were once again on the march, and the siege of Pavia had begun. The sheer fact that Charles could encircle Pavia for a grueling 10 months speaks volumes of his army's size and its strength, especially since he could afford to march away from the siege altogether and celebrate Easter in Rome without leaving his stranglehold on the city vulnerable. Lacking the destructive might of siege engines, Charles's forces nonetheless maintained their grip on Pavia. As the harvest came, they seized the surrounding fields, ensuring their own sustenance, while the city's defenders began to starve behind their walls. Pavia's defenders, unready for the long game of siege warfare, found themselves ill-prepared, their stores running dangerously low as the months dragged on. Trapped within the walls was Desiderius himself, while his son Adelchis had fled to the seemingly impenetrable fortress of Verona, shielding Carloman's widow and children under its protection. Leaving the bulk of his army to maintain the siege, Charles advanced with a smaller detachment on Verona. The city, sensing the futility of resistance, surrendered without so much as a sword drawn. Adelchis, seeing his fate closing in, fled to the far-off haven of Constantinople. Meanwhile, Carloman's widow fell into Charles's hands and from that moment disappeared into the shadows of history. Throughout the waning months of 773 and into the biting cold of early 774, Charles patrolled the lands surrounding Pavia, stamping his authority on every corner of Lombard territory. Desiderius's commanders, paralyzed by fear or perhaps indifference, made no move to rescue their beleaguered king, and within the walls of Pavia, Desiderius himself remained inert, trapped both by siege and by indecision. Quote, "The 10th month of the siege had come. Disease, hunger, and despair gnawed at Pavia's defenders, while Desiderius, an unloved king, listened helplessly as reports of betrayal flooded in from every corner of his kingdom. Then on a fateful Tuesday in June 774, Pavia's gates creaked open to admit its conqueror." End quote. Charles, in his moment of triumph, received the humbled Lombard noble's submission and crowned himself not only king of the Franks, but now ruler of the Lombards as well. As for Desiderius, he and his family were exiled to northeastern France. There, stripped of his throne, the former king was given the choice of a monastic life, an invitation he accepted with surprising grace, embracing a piety that eluded him in power. With Desiderius cast down from his throne, the balance of power in Italy was violently upended. A new era was dawning, one that would forever reshape the fate of the peninsula. Hadrian and Charles, two giants in their own right, forged a delicate but powerful alliance. Hadrian craved dominion over Italy, a power he could not command without the iron fist of Charles's army. Meanwhile, Charles, the pious warrior, sought to serve God, but on his own terms, answering to no earthly oversight. Though their ambitions appeared to clash, the two titans came to a mutual understanding, each man knowing where his authority ended and the other's began, a pact that was born of pragmatism and necessity. When Charles arrived in Rome for Easter in 774, he and Hadrian stood as equals, each commanding the respect of their respective domains. Yet, the shrewd negotiator Hadrian extracted from the Frankish king a crucial concession. Charles confirmed the papacy's control over vast tracts of Italian land, nearly the entire peninsula, first promised by Pepin to Pope Stephen II. Now, as king of the Lombards, Charles held sway over much of this territory, though parts still lay under the control of independent lords and remnants of the Byzantine Empire, remnants of Justinian's ambitions, won by the sword of Belisarius decades before. Not all of this land, however, was Charles's to freely bestow. Whether Hadrian believed Charles would wrest control of the rest of the lands of Byzantium for the glory of Rome is a question left unanswered by history. Charles, though master of Italy in name, spent the majority of his reign waging relentless campaigns north of the Alps. Whatever promises he made to Hadrian, it was clear he never intended to serve as the Pope's enforcer in Italian affairs. Yet Charles held the Pope's sacred blessing, and with it he expanded both the reach of Christendom and the boundaries of his burgeoning empire with tireless zeal. In 795, Pope Hadrian passed from this world, and into his place stepped Leo III, a man destined to alter the course of European history. From the outset, Leo III was loathed by many of Rome's citizens, who leveled accusations of scandal and corruption against him, casting a shadow over his papacy. In 799, an assassination attempt left Leo bloodied but alive. Driven from his seat, he fled Italy, seeking sanctuary in Aachen, where Charles had carved out his imperial stronghold. Desperate and embattled, Leo demanded Charles's intervention, calling upon the Frankish king to restore him to his rightful place on the papal throne. Charles sent Leo back to Rome under the protection of an armed escort. Then, in December of 800, the king himself followed, riding into the Eternal City with all the grandeur of a conquering hero. Upon arrival, Charles commanded Leo to stand before the people and swear publicly that he was innocent of the charges against him. With this oath, Leo's papacy was reaffirmed. Leo's next move would forever alter the course of European history. On Christmas Day, 800 AD, in the hallowed halls of St. Peter's Basilica, Charles knelt before the altar in prayer. As he lifted his gaze heavenward, Leo III, in a move no one could have foreseen, placed a crown upon Charles's brow. Quote, "Hail to Charles the Augustus," Leo proclaimed, "crowned by God, the great and peace-bringing Emperor of the Romans," end quote. The words rang out 3 times, sealing the fate of an empire reborn. The motives behind this monumental coronation have long been debated, sparking speculation that still echoes throughout history today. It is clear that Charles hungered for a title to rival the emperors of ancient Rome, yet his biographer Einhard suggests that if Charles had known of Leo's intentions, he would never have set foot in the basilica that day, for the coronation in its grandeur shackled him to Leo's designs. It can be surmised that Charles, while coveting the title of emperor, wished to claim it on his own terms, free of the constraints that came with Leo's consecration. In orchestrating this grand spectacle, Leo inserted himself into the heart of the imperial equation, wielding power in a way that only a pope could. Though Leo outwardly bowed to Charles, who had now become Charlemagne, Charles the Great, his act of crowning the emperor cemented the dominance of the church in the political sphere, ensuring that the pope held the power to make and unmake emperors. In this delicate dance of power, the question lingered: who held true supremacy? The emperor crowned in glory, or the man whose hands had placed the crown upon his head? Perhaps stung by the humiliation of his earlier public oath, Leo's crowning gesture was a subtle but resounding statement. No matter how much the papacy relied on the emperor's military might, it was only the pope who held the divine power to create emperors. In the end, both men reaped the fruits of this monumental moment. Quote, "The coronation had results for 1,000 years. It strengthened the papacy and the bishops by making civil authority derived from ecclesiastical conferment. It strengthened Charlemagne against baronial and other disaffection by making him a very vicar of God. It vastly advanced the theory of the divine right of kings," end quote, from Durant in the Age of Faith. The ripples of Charlemagne's coronation extended far beyond the borders of the Frankish kingdom. The Byzantine Empire, already feeling the relentless pressure of Islam at its borders, now faced a renewed threat. Charlemagne's coronation breathed life into the ghost of the old Roman Empire, with its gaze turned eastward. The timing of Charlemagne's coronation was no coincidence. In Constantinople, political chaos reigned. Empress Irene had seized power after deposing her own son, casting a shadow of instability over the Eastern throne. By the time Irene was unseated and Nicephorus I took the throne in 802, the revival of the Western Roman Empire was already an undeniable reality, a new power rising in the West. The new emperor, Michael I, confronted the inevitable. He addressed Charlemagne not as a rival, but as a brother, acknowledging him as an equal in the grand imperial game. The rising tension between East and West deepened the divide between the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox churches, each emperor fiercely championing his own faith, setting the stage for future conflicts. Charlemagne's decisive victory at Pavia had established him as the unrivaled military power in Italy, solidifying his alliance with the Papacy. This positioned him as the architect of a dynasty, sworn to defend the faith with sword and crown alike. Again from Durant, quote, "The coronation established the Holy Roman Empire in fact, though not in theory," end quote. Though Charlemagne's dynasty would falter in the 10th century, the Holy Roman Empire itself would rise in its full glory under Otto I in 962, cementing a political legacy that endured for centuries.